Today, we're diving into a really dark, but let's be honest, fascinating question. How did some of history's most infamous cult leaders, these people who commanded absolute life or death loyalty, end up meeting their own demise?
Well, as you can probably guess, the end for these figures is almost never peaceful. Their deaths often become a twisted reflection of the very chaos and delusion they preached. And what's wild is they tend to fall into just a few distinct, chilling categories that honestly reveal everything about the movements they built. So, first up, we've got the leaders who managed to convince themselves and their followers that death wasn't an end. Oh no, it was a graduation, a transit to some other, better world. They framed the ultimate act of devotion as dying right alongside them. Okay, let's go to November 18th, 1978. This is where Jim Jones pulled off one of the most notorious mass death events in modern history. After a visiting U.S. congressman was murdered by his followers, Jones knew the outside world was coming for them. So he called for what he called a revolutionary suicide, pitching it as this noble escape from a corrupt world. The method? Cyanide-laced Flavor Aid. 909, that was the total number of people who died that day. Jones himself was found with a gunshot wound. It's suspected he took his own life. And to put that number into perspective, until September 11th, 2001, Jonestown was the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act. Just staggering.
But this is the number that is just absolutely heartbreaking. Of those 909 people, 276 of them were children. They were poisoned first, many by their own parents, while armed guards stood by to make sure that no one could have second thoughts and escape.
And you'd think this was a one-off tragedy, right? Well, almost 2 decades later, something eerily similar happened. In March of 1997, a man named Marshall Applewhite convinced 38 of his followers that an alien spacecraft was hiding in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet, just waiting to pick them up. But to get on board, they had to shed their earthly containers in what they called a final exit.
So let's just pause and compare these two for a second. It's fascinating, right? Both Jones and Applewhite completely reframed death as something you'd want to do. But their justifications were different. For Jones, it was this political act, a revolutionary suicide against a world he saw as corrupt. For Applewhite, it was spiritual, a final exit to level up, basically. And yet, the end result was the same: mass death, all orchestrated by one charismatic guy. And this pattern wasn't just limited to them. You had the Order of the Solar Temple, where leaders Joseph de Montbreau and Luc Jouret led dozens of their followers on a so-called transit to the star Sirius. Their end was just a horrific cocktail of poison, bullets, and fire, proving that this idea of death as an escape was a tragically recurring theme. All right, let's shift gears. Our next category moves away from these planned transits and into something much more explosive. These are the leaders whose violent beliefs led them straight into a final, deadly showdown with the very world they hated. The 51-day siege at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, is the perfect example. It all started with a botched raid that turned into a deadly gunfight. What followed was this incredibly tense, weeks-long standoff between the FBI and the group's leader, David Koresh. It all came to a tragic end on April 19th when a tear gas assault was followed by a massive fire that just consumed the entire compound. 79 people died, including Koresh and 21 children. And the autopsies revealed a grim detail. Many, including Koresh, had died from gunshots, not from the fire itself. And then you have a guy like Adolfo Constanzo. He was a drug trafficker who mixed his criminal operations with these horrific rituals that included human sacrifice. So when the police finally cornered him in a Mexico City apartment, what did he do? Did he surrender? No way. He ordered one of his last followers to just open fire on him and another cult member. He chose to go out in a hail of bullets rather than face capture. Okay, so not every cult leader's story ends in a fiery explosion or a self-made apocalypse. Some of them actually get caught. They get brought into the justice system, only to find out that the final judgment isn't coming from a judge and jury, but from somebody else's hands. I mean, look at Roach Theriault, the leader of the Anthill Kids. His reign of terror was just unbelievably brutal, involving torture and mutilation. It finally ended when he was arrested and got a life sentence, but his actual end? That came decades later, inside a prison, courtesy of his cellmate and a homemade knife. And this is just wow. After he killed Theriault, his attacker just calmly walked up to the prison guards,
handed over the weapon, and said this. Just so matter of fact. It was such a raw, brutal, and completely unceremonious end for a man who had held absolute power over so many people. A very different kind of justice was served to Shoko Asahara, the leader of Aum Shinrikyo. This is the group responsible for that horrific sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway in 1995. He was arrested, and after a really long trial, he was convicted of 27 murders. The state delivered the final sentence, execution by hanging, which was carried out on July 6, 2018. And that brings us to our last category. And honestly, this one might be the most unsettling of all. It's the end that isn't violent or dramatic. It's quiet, it's slow, it's ordinary. It's the anticlimax. Charles Manson, the name itself is basically synonymous with cult terror. But he didn't die in a shootout. He didn't die in a suicide pact. He was caught, convicted, and then he just sat in a prison cell for over 45 years. Every time he came up for parole, the board took one look at him and said, absolutely not. His life of pure chaos just fizzled into decades of prison routine. And this slide just lays out the stark reality of it all. After a whole lifetime of being this icon of evil, Charles Manson died at 83 from natural causes, in a hospital, cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, colon cancer. The man who orchestrated the horrific Tate LaBianca murders ended up with a mundane clinical death certificate. It's unsettling, you know? It denies us that sense of cosmic justice, leaving his terrifying legacy to just fade out in a sterile hospital room. So, from revolutionary suicide to a fiery siege, from prison justice to a quiet death from old age, the endings of these leaders are as varied and as twisted as their ideologies. But it all leaves us with one final lingering question. When the charismatic figure is finally gone, does the dangerous idea they created ever really die?